The sun spilled gently across the marble floors of the grand kitchen, catching the silver handles of the cupboards, and throwing glimmers of light onto the walls. To anyone from the outside, this mansion was perfection, a symbol of wealth and power, guarded by tall gates and lined with manicured hedges. But behind those walls lived a man who carried more loneliness than his fortune could ever cover. Charles Montgomery, a billionaire known across industries for his sharp instincts and cold negotiations, returned home every evening to a house that looked full but felt empty. His wife had left years ago, unable to cope with the challenges of raising their twin sons who had been born profoundly deaf. Since then, Charles had buried himself in work, letting nannies and maids rotate through the household, but none ever seemed to last. They either grew distant from the boy's unique needs or left quietly, saying the burden was too much. That afternoon, Charles walked into his house earlier than expected, his polished shoes clicking softly against the hallway tiles. He loosened his tie, briefcase in hand, exhausted from endless meetings, when something unusual stopped him in his tracks. From the kitchen came a burst of laughter, not the kind one hears in words, but the kind that explodes in pure joy in movement, in soundless energy. His heart skipped. His twins rarely expressed joy openly. Curious and cautious, he moved toward the noise, every step filling him with a strange anticipation. And then he froze. In front of him, his twin boys stood barefoot on the kitchen counter, their matching red shirts glowing under the sunlight. Between them pulsed a large speaker, its colored lights flashing with rhythm. The music thumped, vibrating the surface, a rhythm they couldn't hear, but could feel. And dancing with them, her arms raised high, was the maid he had hired only 2 weeks ago, Isabella. She wore her cleaning apron and bright yellow gloves, but in that moment, she looked like a conductor leading a symphony only they understood. Her movements were exaggerated, her smile wide, her body swaying to guide the boys. The twins followed her cues, their small hands mimicking hers, their feet stomping happily, lost in a world of vibration and light. Charles stood still, briefcase dangling from his hand, his mouth parting slightly. For years, he had struggled to connect with his sons. He had tried tutors, therapists, even the best specialists money could buy. Yet, he never truly broke through their silence. And here, this woman, a maid, had unlocked something he had never managed to touch. He felt something stir in his chest, something both sharp and tender. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of unexpected connections, please take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire and remind us of the beauty hidden in everyday life. Charles cleared his throat softly, but the sound was lost in the music. Still, Isabella noticed him. For a brief second, panic flashed across her face. She quickly helped the twins down, switching off the speaker, as if she had been caught breaking an unspoken rule. But the boys protested, their little hands reaching toward her, their eyes glowing with unspoken words. Charles stared, not angry, but bewildered as he stepped into the kitchen. The silence after the music felt heavy, yet his heart was anything but calm. Isabella lowered her head, apologizing in hushed tones, but the twins tugged at her apron, signing clumsily with their small hands. Charles, though not fluent in sign language, understood enough to know what they were saying. They were calling her mommy. The word hit him harder than anything else. His ex-wife's absence had left a void in their lives, one that no amount of wealth could fill. His boys had learned to stop asking for her, but the need never left. And here they were, finding comfort in a maid's laughter, in her dance, in her presence. For a man who had built empires, Charles felt suddenly powerless. That night, he sat alone in his study, replaying the scene over and over. He remembered their glowing faces, the way they had clung to Isabella, as if she were the center of their world. He also remembered his own failures. How often he had chosen boardrooms over bedtime stories, meetings over meal times. For the first time in years, guilt dug deep into his chest. Yet beneath the guilt was something else. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this woman was showing him what he had been too blind to see, that his sons didn't need perfection. They just needed love, creativity, and someone willing to meet them where they were. Over the days that followed, Charles began to notice changes. The twins smiled more, laughed more, and sought Isabella's attention constantly. She introduced games using colors, vibrations, and gestures, teaching them to associate soundless music with movement and light. She even taped balloons to their wrists so they could feel the pulse of bass notes in their arms. It wasn't therapy in the traditional sense, but it was connection, and it was working. Charles watched silently from the doorway most evenings, his heart melting a little more each time. Slowly, Isabella's influence began to touch Charles too. One evening, she invited him to join their little dance sessions, hesitant and awkward. He stood by the counter as the twins placed his hands on the speaker so he could feel the vibrations. They giggled as he stumbled through clumsy steps, but their laughter wasn't cruel. For the first time, Charles wasn't the CEO, the billionaire, or the stern father. He was simply Daddy, learning to move in a world without sound. The walls he had built around his heart began to crack and joy seeped through. But not everything was smooth. A few of his wealthy friends and colleagues, upon learning that his sons were spending time dancing with the maid, mocked him. They suggested Isabella was overstepping her role, that a maid had no business shaping the lives of billionaire children. Charles felt the pressure of judgment, the weight of expectation. Yet, when he looked into his son's eyes, brighter and more alive than ever, he knew he couldn't take this away from them. For the first time, he didn't care what the world thought. One morning, Charles sat down with Isabella over coffee. She shared her own story, how she had once been studying music before tragedy forced her to leave college and work to support her family. Her brother had been deaf too, and through him, she had discovered the beauty of feeling music rather than just hearing it. That was why she understood the twin so naturally. Listening to her, Charles felt his respect deepen. She wasn't just a maid. She was a woman who carried compassion and resilience in her heart, someone who had lived through pain, but turned it into joy for others. As weeks turned into months, the mansion transformed. The boys were no longer shadows moving silently in the hallways. They were bursts of energy running, laughing, dancing. Charles himself began cutting work earlier, choosing dinners at home over late-night calls. He was rediscovering life not in boardrooms, but in his kitchen with his sons and the maid, who had unknowingly become the soul of the house. Then came a day Charles would never forget. The twins, after weeks of Isabella's patient teaching, signed something new to him during breakfast. It was clumsy but unmistakable. They signed, "Daddy, dance." His throat tightened as tears blurred his eyes. He pushed back his chair, stood up, and without hesitation began moving to the silent rhythm Isabella had taught them. The twins cheered, waving their little arms in delight. For Charles, it wasn't just a dance. It was a bridge built on love between him and the sons he had once felt locked away from. By then, Charles knew his life had changed forever. Money, success, reputation, none of it mattered compared to the simple joy of connection. The maid he had hired to clean his house had cleaned something far greater, the emptiness in his soul. And as he looked at her, leading his boys in another joyful spin, he realized his heart was no longer cold. It was alive, beating in rhythm with the dance of his family. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and second chances. Before we close, we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story moved you the most? Comment below and let us know. Your words might inspire someone else today. That afternoon, as sunlight once again poured into the kitchen, Charles joined his sons and Isabella without hesitation. No longer an observer, no longer a man afraid of his own shortcomings. He laughed and danced with them, his arms wide, his heart open. And in that ordinary kitchen filled with extraordinary love, a billionaire discovered that the greatest wealth in life is not counted in numbers, but in moments that melt the heart.